Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second Growing Your Workforce live session. In these sessions, we premiere our new episodes of the Growing Your Workforce Live podcast, which are about 10 minutes long. This one's coming in a little shorter. And then we'll be following up with related guest chats and presentations. So today you'll be hearing about our episode on how COVID-19 has changed the digital divide. And then we'll be engaging in a fireside chat with Kate Barnes Gallagher, the Executive Director of Economic Development with the Western Ontario Wardens Caucus, about advocating for workforce issues at the decision-making level. So we've got an exciting session coming up. There will be, in a second, I'm going to hit play on this podcast and visual presentation. I'd like to draw your attention to a couple things. On your user controls, there should be a chat as well as a question and answer. Anybody is free to talk about what they're hearing. Our two guest writers, Shannon Stoltz-Lemon and Jessica Gowers, are going to be in the chat and in the Q&A to answer your questions about anything you'd like to hear. With that, I will be stopping my video for a little bit, and there will be our visual presentation and our podcast.
My name is Jacqueline Demendive, and I'm the Director of Communications for the Workforce Planning and Development Board of Elgin, Middlesex, and Oxford. I'm also the editor of the former Growing Your Workforce publication. Growing Your Workforce was an e-magazine which you can still read for free on workforcedevelopment.ca/growingyourworkforce. 15 writers and prominent figures in workforce planning and development volunteered their time to make over 21 articles during its run that made readers think, introduced them to new ideas, and made community connections for the benefit of programs, businesses, education, and job seekers across the province of Ontario. While our initial run is over, I'm so excited to be presenting the Growing Your Workforce Live series. These 25-minute presentations will enlighten you and invite you to dive in below the tip of the iceberg on workforce issues. Each live stream is accompanied by a podcast episode you can take with you to learn about workforce issues on the go. In this episode, the world is coming to a new digital normal. What does that mean for job seekers, services, and employers? It's hard to remember what life was like before COVID-19. We communicated through emails and phone calls, but had anyone ever really used Zoom as often as we do now? Now, it's crazy to think that we're reliant on these technologies for our daily workflow and lives. COVID-19 really has pressed the fast-forward button on technology and how reliant we are on it. The workday as we remember it is slowly being replaced by more and more digitization. The employment landscape has changed entirely. Think of the transformation of the food sector, which, by the way, is being researched thoroughly by an ongoing local study called Fresher. The demand for a full house of staff has been slashed. Conversely, digital employment also provides a vast extension of opportunities. The ability to receive training online and attend global-level courses and conferences has truly opened up a new realm of possibility for bettering employees at their positions or simply expanding a resume for a job seeker. It's been wildly impressive how quickly the government, school systems, and workplaces have been able to come up with methods and software to switch everything to online platforms. In an astounding way, we have mostly been able to keep up with our responsibilities with a relatively quick transition to this new world, all things considered. But what about those who struggle with using technology for one reason or another? The change is not as simple for some as it is for others. Despite the fact that digitization is slowly accommodating our needs and simplifying the process of certain jobs, a lot of people in positions are getting left behind. Digitization has gone on to create a barrier for many, even the most experienced employees and sometimes even long-standing employers. While this may seem like something we can overcome, it is not proving to be easy, and many feel like they've been thrown into the deep end of the pool without a life jacket. Not everyone has access to an equal amount of technology, nor have they necessarily had enough training to use it properly. With technology being used more frequently in the workplace, digital literacy is becoming more and more necessary for an increasing number of jobs. For clarification of what we mean, here is the Brookfield Institute's working definition of digital literacy. It's the ability to use technological tools to solve problems, underpinned by the ability to critically understand digital content and tools. This can also include the more advanced ability to create new technological tools, products, and services, But here, we'll be using this definition to refer to the ability to be agile and gain a sense of mastery of technological tools and processes, as well as the information held within. The list of workplaces that require digital literacy could be never ending, as we see the world becoming more digital all around us. And it comes up in places you wouldn't expect. Side of road produce sellers needed to shift from cash to contactless payment. Suddenly, farmers everywhere had to learn how to use a credit card reader on a tablet or to set up an e-commerce website so they can provide curbside drop-off or pickup. Almost no job is immune to some level of digitization. But all this transformation can pose a real barrier for people who do not excel in digital literacy. This is part of the digital divide. According to the Program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies survey, 15% of surveyed Canadians could not open a basic email or web browser. In addition to the skills issue, not all Canadians have access to equal internet connection depending on where they're located. Furthermore, good internet can be restrictive by cost. Rural and Indigenous communities have slower connections and less access to reliable internet. The government has promised to have 100% access to fast and reliable internet across Canada by 2030, meaning this issue could potentially be an ongoing problem for the next 6 to 10 years at least. The responsibility of closing the gap of the digital divide has historically fell upon the government, public services, and public institutions through avenues such as curriculum delivery, infrastructure, schools, and libraries. But there are certain benefits for employers who are willing to take the time to teach their employees digital literacy. For starters, research shows that employees are going to be able to stay with the job longer. They'll also be able to continuously improve at the job, therefore becoming an even more valuable asset as time goes on. This also saves the employer the resources it takes to search for and hire new employees when tech requirements change over. And it will also help with internal promotion as well as foster loyalty to the company. But recognizing a gap in digital literacy can be hard to see. Even extremely skilled senior employees who are experienced and familiar with their expectations, routines, and the software may face problems when it comes to updates or changes in these things. As we mentioned at the start, digitization can provide a vast extension of opportunities, with one caveat. We need awareness that great members of our workforce may be lacking digital experience and comfort. Often overlooked is general training on digital skills that we can take for granted, such as word processing, cloud storage, and digital communication etiquette. As the world changes, means to information and for communications also change. To promote ongoing inclusion, there needs to be opportunities for training on existing and new software. And we can't assume everyone will adapt or be familiar with it. With the way technology can provide new opportunities for improvement and knowledge, we all need to be advocating for more accessibility and learning for the workforce. Many organizations are attempting different ways to support those greatly affected by the digital divide all over Canada. It has become an issue that increasingly needs to be prioritized, especially as COVID-19 drives the digital transformation forward. While investments in digital literacy are essential, so are investments in digital infrastructure. There are still many barriers in many communities regarding education and training. In the future, part of the focus must be achieving consistent access to services and learning in as many communities as possible. We can't control how the world is changing due to COVID-19 and beyond, but we can adapt and do what we can both to help and advocate for those in the digital divide with increased access and infrastructure alike. To conclude, I'd first like to thank you, the listener. This episode has been written by Shannon Stoltz-Limon and Jessica Gowers in collaboration with myself. You can find sources and more reading on our website by going to www.workforcedevelopment.ca/growingyourworkforce. Keep an eye on our newsletter to find out about future episodes, and see you next time on Growing Your Workforce Live.
So thank you so much for your listening and engagement over the course of that. A lot of topics on advocating. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on our guest, Kate Burns Gallagher. Kate, are you there?
Hi.
Hello. Excellent. I think I might need to unpin my video here before I introduce you. There we go. Okay. Kate Burns Gallagher is the Executive Director of Economic Development for the Western Ontario Wardens Caucus, a not-for-profit organization representing 15 upper-tier and single-tier municipalities in southwestern Ontario, aiming to enhance the prosperity and overall well-being of rural and small urban communities across the region. As part of her work, she extends influence to federal and provincial legislation and programs through her advocacy, research, and analysis. She has developed lasting and meaningful relationships within the industry and has been an innovator in developing new programs for today's economy. Thanks so much for agreeing to chat with me today, Kate. How are you?
Great. Thanks so much, Jacqueline. Thanks so much for asking me to join. I'm really excited.
Awesome. So let's jump right into it. What are some of the things in your head that we need to keep in mind when advocating for workforce issues at the federal level?
Yeah, so advocating is always an interesting prospect. And one of the places we always start is with the federal mandate letters. Each minister, when they are given their ministry, and they're given those mandate letters. So whenever we're looking, so workforce is a great example. So the minister responsible there, you go look at the mandate letters and see what they've been charged with within their government. So, for example, Minister of Employment Workforce Development has worked with Statistics Canada to strengthen local labor market data, work with the Minister of Finance to continue implementation of the new Canada training benefit, and invest in skills training to ensure that there are enough qualified workers to support energy audits. So when you're approaching that minister, you want to make sure that your priorities are aligning with theirs. If you want success, that's the best way to achieve it, is to make sure that there's that alignment when you're approaching different ministries.
So it sounds like it's really all about finding your allies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that there's a lot of allies for specifically workforce issues right now?
Oh, most definitely, at all levels of government. And in light of COVID-19, it's really put a spotlight on certain sectors as well. And as your podcast also highlights, that digital divide, right? So not only do we have workforce issues, but they're also heightened because of this lack of access to broadband as well.
Absolutely. So, and it also reminds me of, I come from like a marketing background, and it comes from like finding your audience, but then you also
Mhm.
have to tailor your messaging. So, how do you think we can tailor our messaging to capture the attention of decision makers?
Well, that's just exactly what you just said, Jacqueline, is you need to know your audience. No matter the level of government, you need to align your asks with their priorities. Because if you're asking for blue and they're looking for red, well, purple's not really going to make it work, right? Sometimes maybe, but what you need to do is find that middle ground and find where your priorities and their priorities align. And then you can really find the success in your advocacy work.
I love that metaphor of the red and the blue, and I think with COVID-19, we can always look on some of the bright spots in this horrible situation and see that so much of this messaging and so much of this research is easier to do than ever, I think, as
Mhm.
communication is online and super accessible. So what are speaking of that sort of red and blue, when you want to push purple, what are your observations on pushing innovation to funders looking for proven results? It's kind of at odds, right?
Mhm. Yeah, so I'm a firm believer in that we don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? You've got your red and blue, you got purple, but they all work. And but there are endless ways in which we can improve the wheel, make it run faster and better and smoother in different conditions. So when you're looking, and the same can be said for the world of innovation. If you're looking at doing something new, there might be someone who's done a project similar within the same wheelhouse, if you will, and you can pull from that. So even if what you're doing is brand new, it's the Napster, right? I use that because I'm a 90s kid. It's the Napster of what you're doing. There's something that would have come before it that you could maybe pull some correlation to, that had some policy behind it, that had some proven results, that you can say, okay, look at what came before us. This is some proven results, but we're going to make it better, and we're going to make it even more, we're going to make it Spotify, not Napster.
I love it. And it's also so important, I think, to find out what came before you, so that you don't find yourself accidentally duplicating something that's been done before and causing that really inefficient overlap, right?
Right. It's all about that R&D, rob and duplicate, man.
I love I love it. So at the end of the day, it's exhausting, right? Advocating because you know that there's people who need help or concepts that need more awareness around them, and you're spending your energy not just maintaining your current projects or what you're working on, but trying to push for something new and something important. And it's also that sense of responsibility. What do you like? How is it worth it for you?
Well, I'm not gonna lie that it's a really hard question to answer sometimes. Some days you're just, what am I doing? Endless hours, days, weeks, months, even years sometimes can go by and you don't necessarily see the results. You get those little wins, right? Whether it's funding for a project, or even sometimes down the line, and as you said, COVID-19 has those silver linings. And there's been lots of great policy announced that people have said, oh my gosh, light bulbs are going off. Yeah, okay, what you've been talking about is a real issue and we need to step up. And broadband, I think, is an investment in the infrastructure, as your podcast talks about, has really been brought to light and brought to bear that investment needs to happen. Now it's all of the jiggling and joggling between how it's going to happen and whose project's going to get the funding. But as long as we get broadband and get people connected, that's the win, right? So as long as what you're working for gets that end goal, those are the wins, and that's all worth it, because we're here to try and make everybody's lives better at the end of the day.
That's so true. I think if you can cultivate a culture of celebration around you, you're more likely to meet your targets because you're celebrating the little wins along the way. That's such good advice. At this point, I'm going to direct everyone to take a look at the chat and the Q&A panel. Choose either one, and you can ask any question you like, either based on the episode or based on what Kate has talked about or Kate's work. While we wait for the questions to roll in, Kate, is there anything you wanted to talk about in regards to what you're working on right now?
Yeah, so tying it back to your podcast, is that it? Do you call it a podcast? Yeah, podcast.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay. The wardens really are very active right now in engaging with both the federal and provincial governments and advocating for that additional funding for investment in infrastructure for broadband. So I see lots of names on the participant list that I'm familiar with, and you might be familiar with SWIFT. And granted, it's been a long time coming, but all 15 counties now have announced that there's requests for proposals to get infrastructure in the ground under SWIFT, the original project. And now what the ones are advocating for is SWIFT 2.0. So you mentioned about the CRTC wanting 100% connectivity by 2030. The step before that is 95% connectivity by 2026. A SWIFT 1.0, so the 15 counties that are just out now, that is getting connection to 89 to 90% of Southwestern Ontario by 2022-ish. And with our 2.0, we're looking at that 95% connection by 2025. So beating the federal target by a year, but it's going to cost $1 billion. It's a $1 billion investment to get from that 90 to 95. So the more people you get connected, the cost gets greater for those people farther out, right? Because you're putting infrastructure in the ground. So we're really advocating to get to that 95% and get SWIFT 2.0, especially in light of everything that's happening. We need our students connected. We've seen in the last week how many more students have gone online in our region. We need to get our businesses connected, and we need to get our households connected for everyday things like renewing your driver's license or your sticker for your plate or renewing your health card. So we need to make sure that our residents, businesses, and students are connected, and that digital divide is not widening. We need to narrow that gap.
So I'm seeing a question come in
Yeah.
from Deb Montenay. So
Yeah.
once the access to broadband is there, how will we address the gap between those who are proficient with the technology and those who aren't?
So once the access to broadband is there, how will we address the gap between those who are proficient with technology and those who aren't? So are we talking about the speed of the technology?
I think it's, we talked about in the podcast sort of two halves of the digital divide, which is the access, but then also literacy, the ability to
Right,
master those new technologies and understand the information coming at you.
right. Well,
And
I
and
think, oh, sorry.
Deb's also, sorry, elaborating that it's a more of the ability to learn.
Right. Well, I think you get the infrastructure on the ground, and then we need to also fund that literacy piece, right? You can no doubt you can write a million books, but if people don't know how to read them, what good is it? So groups like Literacy Link South Central are fantastic resources, and we need to make sure that there's funding going to those resources to connect people. Also, within our library systems, our libraries have great systems in place to provide that literacy, the digital literacy. So I couldn't agree with you more, Deb. While we're building the infrastructure, we also have to build the literacy into it, definitely.
Yeah, that's a really important consideration. I have another question here from Shelley. In what way can service providers support broadband investments in our region? Our work in the not-for-profit field is significantly limited with the lack of access to digital literacy supports.
How we can service providers provide support? Great question. What I would do is talk to all levels of government. So talk to your mayor, talk to the warden, talk to counselors, write letters of support as well. And Shelley, I'd be happy to connect with you as well to find out how that lack of digital literacy and access is affecting your organization. And then that's another, if you will, tool in our tool belt when we're going to those different levels of government to advocate for the infrastructure, but we can also talk about that literacy. So by all means, Shelley, I'd love to connect offline and get more of your stories about the literacy and the access and how they work in tandem, if you will.
I love it. Well, that's all the questions. So I want to say thank you for the phenomenal chat, Kate, and for being so open and ready to talk about advocacy, but also your work and what you're up to right now. So before we sign off, there's just a couple things I'll share my screen again. There's just a couple things I wanted to draw your attention to. So we're currently running the Employer One Change Matters survey. Those of you familiar with our Employer One survey know that it goes out at the end of the year and it looks at workforce issues from the past year. But with everything going on and everything that happened, especially in terms of the pandemic, there's been a need to re-understand that information and to get additional information to help inform our future initiatives. So for employers, we have the Employer One Change Matters survey because we understand that your business has changed and that stuff really needs to be recorded and really needs to matter. So you can find that at employer1.ca. And if you know of any groups who'd be interested in answering the survey, you can always contact me and connect with me at jacqueline@workforcedevelopment.ca. And secondly, if you enjoyed this sort of webinar format, our next webinar is about Fresher, which we do once a month, and we spoke about that also in the podcast. So it is a survey on the food retail industry and recovery. So you can register for that at workforcedevelopment.ca/connector. And then the last thing I just remembered, there will be there will be a follow-up email. We're collecting a little bit of information to help keep our projects running this year. So if you could answer that email and just let us know what you thought of the event, that would be fantastic. So with that, I'm going to end our session. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope to see you at the next Growing Your Workforce Live. All right, bye-bye.